In the year 480 BC, the largest army the world had ever seen, led by a king who saw himself as a divine power, descended upon Greece to extinguish the world's first democracy. Standing in their path was a narrow mountain pass called the Hot Gates, and a small force of Greeks led by 300 of the most disciplined warriors in history, the Spartans. This is the story of their legendary last stand, a battle that would echo through eternity as a symbol of courage against impossible odds. But what really happened at Thermopylae, and how did these few men change the course of Western history? To really understand what happened at Thermopylae, we have to rewind the clock about 10 years to 490 BC on the plains of Marathon. It was here that the first Persian invasion of Greece, ordered by King Darius the Great, was shockingly and humiliatingly crushed. A smaller, highly motivated Athenian-led army routed the Persian forces, sending them scrambling back across the Aegean Sea. For Darius, this was an insult he simply could not bear. He had tried to punish Athens for supporting a Greek rebellion, but instead, his empire's reputation was shattered. Darius vowed revenge, but he'd die before he could get it. That burning obsession for conquest passed to his son and successor, Xerxes I. Xerxes wasn't just finishing his father's work. He saw himself as a divinely appointed ruler, destined to succeed where his father had failed. He was determined to crush the defiant Greeks once and for all, not just to punish them, but to absorb all of Greece into his vast, ever-expanding empire. For 4 years, Xerxes put together the largest military force the world had ever seen. From every corner of his sprawling domain, from Mesopotamia to India, from Egypt to Bactria, he drafted soldiers. The ancient historian Herodotus claimed the army had millions of men, a number modern historians think is wildly exaggerated. Still, even the more conservative modern estimates are jaw-dropping, suggesting a land force somewhere between 70,000 and 300,000 soldiers, backed by a colossal fleet of over 1,200 warships. To make this invasion possible, Xerxes ordered breathtaking feats of engineering. He had a canal dug through a peninsula to help his fleet avoid a treacherous coastline. Even more boldly, he commanded a bridge made of ships to be built across the Hellespont Strait, a mile-long pontoon bridge that let his army literally walk from Asia into Europe. When a storm destroyed the first bridge, an enraged Xerxes reputedly ordered the water itself to be whipped 300 times and had the original engineers beheaded. This tells you everything you need to know about the man leading the invasion. His power was absolute, and his resources seemed limitless. As news of this terrifying force spread, a wave of fear washed over the Greek city-states. Many northern states, seeing no hope in resisting, submitted to Persian authority. Greece wasn't a unified country, but a fractured collection of rival states, often at war with each other. Now, facing total annihilation, they had a choice: bend the knee to the Persian king, or stand together and fight for their freedom. In this crisis, a fragile alliance formed, and the leadership of their land forces fell to the one state everyone agreed was the greatest military power in Greece: Sparta. You can't understand Thermopylae without understanding Sparta. Sparta was a real outlier in ancient Greece. While cities like Athens were experimenting with democracy, philosophy, and art, Sparta was perfecting one single, deadly craft: war. Their entire society was a machine designed to produce the world's finest soldiers. This system was called the agaga. For a Spartan male, life was defined by the state from birth. Elders inspected newborns, and any infant deemed weak or imperfect was left on a hillside to die. Survival was the first test. At age 7, boys were taken from their families and entered the agaga, a brutal, state-sponsored training program that lasted for over a decade. They learned to read and write, but the main curriculum focused on survival, discipline, and warfare. They lived in barracks and were deliberately underfed to encourage them to steal food, a useful skill for a campaign. If they were caught, they were viciously punished, not for stealing, but for the incompetence of being discovered. They were taught to endure extreme pain without flinching, to obey any order without question, and to value Sparta's welfare above their own lives. Their training was non-stop, focused on peak physical fitness, weapon mastery, and the complex movements of the phalanx formation. Spartan culture was famous for its short, witty remarks, which we now call laconic phrases. Courage was the highest virtue, cowardice the deepest shame. Soldiers who ran from a fight were branded as outcasts, shunned by everyone. The fear of that social death was often greater than the fear of dying in battle. Even Spartan women were unique in Greece. They were educated, competed in sports, and had a level of freedom that was unheard of in other cities. Their main duty was to raise strong sons for Sparta. A famous Spartan saying has mothers telling their sons to come back from battle, either with your shield or on it, meaning return victorious or die trying, as a soldier fleeing would have had to drop his heavy shield. This is the system that forged King Leonidas and his 300 royal bodyguards, men who had been tempered in the fires of the agoge and who were the embodiment of the Spartan ideal. So, as Xerxes' monster of an army crept south, the Hellenic League, the Greek alliance, had to come up with a plan. The Athenian general Themistocles, a brilliant strategist, proposed a joint land and sea operation. The idea was to block the Persian army at a narrow pass and, at the same time, stop the Persian navy at a narrow strait. This would prevent the fleet from flanking and resupplying the land army. The spot they picked for the land defense was a pass named Thermopylae, which means hot gates in Greek, named for the local sulfur springs. Geographically, this was a brilliant choice. In 480 BC, the pass was an extremely narrow corridor, maybe only 100 meters wide, squeezed between steep mountains and the sea. This terrain would act as a force multiplier, neutralizing the Persians' biggest advantage, their massive numbers, and forcing them into a brutal, head-on fight on even terms. The job of holding this pass fell to one of Sparta's kings, Leonidas. But there was a problem. The invasion was happening during two of the most sacred Greek festivals, the Olympic Games and Sparta's own festival of Carneia. During the Carneia, Spartan law strictly forbade any military action. Caught between sacred law and the literal end of their world, the Spartan elders came up with a compromise. They couldn't send the whole army, but they would allow Leonidas to march north immediately with his personal bodyguard of 300 men. These weren't just any soldiers. They were elite veterans, handpicked by Leonidas. Herodotus adds a chilling detail. Leonidas specifically chose men who already had sons to make sure their family lines wouldn't be wiped out. This suggests Leonidas knew this might be a one-way trip. Before he left, Leonidas consulted the oracle at Delphi, the most revered spiritual authority in Greece. The oracle's prophecy was both terrifying and vague. "Hark, ye men of Sparta, of the wide-wayed streets. Either your glorious town shall be sacked by the sons of Perseus, or, if that be not, the whole land of Lacedaemon shall mourn the death of a king of the house of Heracles." The message was clear. Either Sparta itself would fall, or a Spartan king had to die. For a man like Leonidas, soaked in the Spartan code of duty and sacrifice, the choice wasn't really a choice at all. He marched north to meet his destiny, gathering allies along the way. By the time he reached Thermopylae, the Greek force was around 7,000 men, a mix of Spartans, Thespians, Thebans, and others. It was a tiny force to face an imperial juggernaut, but at the narrow hot gates, they would make their stand. When the Greeks got to Thermopylae, they immediately started preparing their defense. They rebuilt an old wall, the Phocian Wall, that blocked the narrowest part of the pass, and positioned their men behind it. The heart of this army was the hoplites, the heavily armored infantrymen of ancient Greece. A hoplite was a tank of the ancient world. He wore a bronze breastplate, bronze leg guards, and the iconic Corinthian helmet that covered his entire head. His main weapon was a long spear called a doru, and for close quarters combat, he carried a short sword, the xiphos. But his most critical piece of gear was the hoplon, a large, round shield of wood and bronze that protected him from neck to knee. Hoplites fought in a formation called the phalanx. They stood shoulder to shoulder, overlapping their shields to create a solid wall of bronze. The men in the first few ranks pointed their long spears forward, creating a deadly forest of spear points. A disciplined phalanx, especially in a tight space where it couldn't be flanked, was nearly unbreakable. This was the wall Leonidas planned to use to stop the Persian army. Soon, the Persian army arrived, a sea of men and horses stretching as far as the eye could see. King Xerxes set up his throne on a nearby hill to watch the battle. For 4 days, he did nothing. He just waited. He genuinely couldn't believe this tiny group of soldiers would actually defy him. He sent a messenger demanding they surrender. According to the historian Plutarch, Leonidas's reply was famously short: "Molon lab, come and get them." Xerxes was sure the mere sight of his army would make the Greeks run. But the Greeks didn't move. They calmly oiled their bodies, did athletic exercises, and combed their long hair, a Spartan custom before a battle they knew they might not survive. Xerxes' patience finally snapped. On the 5th day, he ordered the attack. The battle began not with a charge, but with a storm of arrows. Xerxes commanded his archers to fire, and Herodotus famously wrote that the arrows were so thick they blotted out the sun. It was then that the Spartan Dynex supposedly made his legendary remark, "Good, then we will have our battle in the shade." The Greeks just lifted their heavy shields, creating a shell of bronze that easily deflected the arrows. Frustrated, Xerxes sent in his first wave of 10,000 infantry, the Medes and Scythians, ordering them to capture the Greeks and bring them to him. The wave crashed against the Spartan shield wall. The result was a massacre. The Persian infantry, with shorter spears and wicker shields, were totally outmatched. Their shields shattered against the bronze hoplons, and their spears were too short to reach the Greeks. The Greeks, meanwhile, methodically stabbed forward from the safety of their phalanx. For the Persians, it was like running into a meat grinder. As men in the front fell, they were trampled by the ranks behind them. The pass was soon choked with bodies. The Greeks, fighting in relays to stay fresh, held their ground without giving an inch. Watching from his throne, Xerxes was furious. He had thrown thousands of his men at the Greeks, and they'd been thrown back with horrific casualties, while Greek losses were minimal. The first day was a total disaster for the Persians, and a stunning success for Leonidas. They had proven that in the narrow confines of the hot gates, superior training and equipment could defy impossible odds. But the day wasn't over, and Xerxes was about to send in his best. As the first day ended, a fuming Xerxes decided it was time to send in his elite. He called up his personal royal guard, the legendary force the Greeks called the Immortals. This was a corps of 10,000 of the finest warriors in the Persian Empire, called Immortals because if a soldier was killed or fell ill, he was immediately replaced, creating the illusion of an invincible, undying unit. These were professional soldiers, better armed than the regular infantry. They were a fearsome sight marching into the pass, their armor glittering. Xerxes was certain that where the others had failed, his Immortals would succeed. He was wrong. The Immortals attacked the Greek line with disciplined fury, but the result was the same. They couldn't break the phalanx. During the fight, the Greeks added a new tactic, the feigned retreat. The phalanx would pretend to break and run, tricking the Persians into a disorganized chase. Then, on signal, the Greeks would suddenly turn. reform their shield wall instantly, and butcher the surprised and overextended enemy. Herodotus says that Xerxes literally jumped out of his throne 3 times in frustration as he watched even his most elite troops get cut to pieces. The pass was a slaughterhouse, filled with the bodies of his best men. By the end of the second day, the Persians had suffered thousands of casualties, while the Greek line was still unbroken. The morale of the Persian army was hitting rock bottom. It seemed the Greek position couldn't be taken. For 2 full days, about 7,000 men had held off an army of over 100,000. Leonidas' strategy was working perfectly. But as the Greeks rested, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man whose name would become a synonym for betrayal for all of history. The man's name was Ephialtes. He was a local who knew the mountains around Thermopylae like the back of his hand. Promised a rich reward by the Persian king, he went to Xerxes' camp with a secret that would seal the fate of the 300 Spartans, a hidden mountain trail, the Anopeia path, that went around the pass and came out behind the Greek position. The thing is, Leonidas knew about this path. He'd stationed 1,000 Phocian soldiers on the mountain to guard it. Xerxes, seizing on this betrayal, immediately sent his general Hydarnes and the elite immortals to follow Ephialtes along the trail under the cover of darkness. The Persians marched through the night. As dawn broke, they stumbled upon the Phocian guards. According to Herodotus, the rustling of leaves from the advancing army was the first warning the Phocians had. After a volley of Persian arrows, the Phocians, thinking they were the main target, retreated up the mountain to make a stand. This was a fatal mistake. The Persians weren't interested in them. They just ignored them and continued down the path to get behind Leonidas. A Phocian messenger scrambled down the mountain to tell Leonidas the devastating news. They were about to be trapped. The position was no longer defensible. The battle was lost. Leonidas immediately called a meeting. With Persians about to attack from the front and rear, the army faced certain annihilation. Most of the Allied commanders argued for an immediate retreat to save the army to fight another day. Leonidas agreed. He dismissed the bulk of the Greek army, ordering them to get out while they could. This wasn't surrender. It was a strategic choice. The stand was always meant to be a delaying action, and by holding the pass for over 2 days and making the Persians pay for every inch in blood, they had already succeeded. The most important thing now was for the rest of the army to escape and continue the fight. But Leonidas wasn't going anywhere. For a Spartan king, retreating was an unthinkable disgrace. He was bound by Spartan law and the oracle's prophecy. He and his 300 Spartans would stay. They would be the rear guard, holding the pass to cover their allies' retreat and fulfill their destiny. They weren't entirely alone. In a moment of incredible heroism that often gets overlooked, the entire group of 700 soldiers from the city of Thespiae, led by their commander Demophilus, voluntarily chose to stay and die with the Spartans. Their sacrifice was a powerful testament to their courage. The 400 Thebans, however, are believed to have surrendered to the Persians during the final stand instead of fighting to the death. Some Spartan helots, servants, were also likely present, so the rear guard was set. 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, 400 Thebans, who mostly surrendered or were forced to stay, along with some Spartan helots, maybe 1,500 men in total, against the full might of the Persian army. Knowing the end was near, Leonidas reportedly told his men to eat a big breakfast, because that night they would dine in the underworld. When the final assault began, the Greeks didn't wait behind their wall. They advanced into the wider part of the pass, determined to kill as many Persians as possible. What followed was pure, desperate violence. The remaining Greeks fought with a fury born of resolve. Herodotus writes that when their spears broke, they fought with their swords. When their swords shattered, they fought with their hands and their teeth. Leonidas fell in the heart of the battle, and a vicious fight broke out over his body. Eventually, the sheer number of Persians was too much. The Greeks were pushed back to a small hill where they made their final stand. Surrounded on all sides, they were finally wiped out by a storm of Persian arrows. By the end, virtually every last Spartan and Thespian lay dead. The hot gates had fallen. On the surface, Thermopylae was a clear victory for Persia. The path to southern Greece was open, and Xerxes' army marched south, burning the evacuated city of Athens. In a final fit of rage, Xerxes had Leonidas' body decapitated and crucified, an act considered barbaric even by the standards of the time. But their sacrifice was anything but meaningless. Strategically, the 3-day delay gave the Greek allies precious time to prepare for the next phase of the war. A few weeks later, at the naval battle of Salamis, the Greek fleet under Themistocles lured the bigger Persian navy into narrow straits, just like at Thermopylae, and won a shattering victory. The next year, at the Battle of Plataea, a unified Greek army, fired up by the heroism at Thermopylae, crushed what was left of the Persian land forces, ending the invasion for good. But the real legacy of Thermopylae goes way beyond military strategy. It became a legend almost immediately. It was a massive propaganda win for the Greeks, boosting morale and forging a sense of unity that had never existed before. It became a timeless symbol of courage against insurmountable odds, of sacrifice for a greater good, and of the refusal to bow to tyranny. After the war, a stone lion was erected at Thermopylae to honor King Leonidas. A famous epitaph, attributed to the poet Simonides, was carved on a stone to commemorate the 300. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. For 2.5 millennia, the story of the 300 Spartans has inspired soldiers, leaders, and artists. It's been retold in poems, books, and the famous graphic novel and movie 300, which, while taking plenty of artistic liberties, captured the raw, heroic spirit of the legend. Thermopylae is the ultimate reminder that history isn't just written by the winners. It's also shaped by the moral power of those who refuse to back down, even when they lose. It's a story that proves a small group of determined people can change the world, and that some defeats are so glorious, they become immortal. The sacrifice at the Hot Gates wasn't an end, but a beginning. It was the spark that ignited the fires of Greek resistance and ultimately helped preserve a culture that laid the groundwork for Western civilization. If you want to explore more legendary last stands and pivotal moments in history, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Let us know in the comments which epic battle from history you'd like to see us cover next. Thank you for watching.